if we go way back, I'm a hillbilly from Northwest Georgia, so I'm a Southern Appalachian boy that grew up chasing everything in the woods and catching fish and grabbing turtles and frogs and listening to birds. And somewhere along the way, I was doing the hunting, doing the fishing, but I got really interested in more kind of ecological questions. And that kind of came to a head getting an environmental science degree, which was actually my BS at UNC Chapel Hill. And then I slowly kind of pivoted into the wildlife world with a master's and PhD. And I've always been interested in game species in particular because of my hunting background, but wild turkeys too, because even though I didn't hunt them from the time I was first a hunter. In other words, I was probably about middle school age, I think, the first time I went on a turkey hunt. But my brother and I were learning that at the same time, and we loved it. And so basically, I've just kind of been waiting on the opportunity. I've gotten to dabble in some turkey work here and there over the years, but when I moved to Oklahoma, this opportunity more or less fell in my lap as a new faculty member, and our agency, ODWC, Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation, was really interested in potential turkey decline in the state. And so me and colleagues were able to put together a proposal, and now I'm here talking to you for the funded project. So much like a lot of the Southeast U.S. right now, it kind of started with anecdotal evidence that the state of Oklahoma had that were kind of pointing to population decline. Now, I also should mention for some of your listeners that maybe aren't familiar, we do have eastern and Rio birds as well as a hybrid zone in Oklahoma. And so our project is all encompassing. I'm focused more on the eastern side just based on the assigned duties within the project team, but the project does include both ends of the state. And importantly, many of those metrics that other states have also found to be concerning, things like poult per hen ratio, declines maybe in hunter harvest. Those have been true on both the eastern side of the state where we've got easterns and on the western side of the state where we've got Rios. So that was the impetus for the agency being involved in a project like this and putting forth the funding to get it started. And then our main goals with that, of course, are to go out and trap birds, again, in both spots, eastern and Rio alike, and use GPS backpacks to essentially focus on hen vital rates, right? And by vital rates, I'm talking about what is survival like, what is their nesting ecology like, and within nesting ecology, that can have to do with, how frequently they're nesting, what's the timing of nesting, is the nest successful? If it is successful, what's the brood size like? Are the broods successful, right? Do the poults end up surviving? And so, so in that sense, our project was kind of designed to be an all-encompassing capture and marking study where we put transmitters on adult hens as well as ultimately poults, very young poults, to try to track poult survival. Kind of layered in with that are some other more landscape scale questions, including a genetics component that some of our colleagues in Texas are helping us with, looking at connectivity, especially in western Oklahoma, as a potential explanation for how populations may or may not be isolated from one another, and that could affect gene flow and ultimately, population level success. But that's the 45-second version. I mean, honestly, so Oklahoma, if you just kind of start small, a lot of these data, they haven't been collected in our area of the Southern Great Plains, and what little bit has, I mean, we're talking 20, 30, maybe even 40 years ago. So at some level, you know, as an agency, ODWC wants to check back in, especially when they're seeing signs of population decline. So to me, that's the two prongs of the why. Number one, there's evidence of decline, and they need to figure out what they can do management-wise to respond to that. But number two, they don't have fresh data from landscapes that are specific to Oklahoma hunters to say whether or not hen survival is high, low, average, is nest success, you know, in the trenches, or is it okay? So those, I think, are the two main motivating factors, you know, from the agency perspective. And then from our perspective, obviously, as researchers, we want to provide those answers. So obviously I enjoy studying and understanding wild turkey ecology, if only because I'm also a user of that resource. But we're here to otherwise help solve problems, because I don't make the management decisions in Oklahoma or Georgia or Tennessee, but work that I do and work that other colleagues do might help those agencies make management decisions. So that's really the thrust of it. So the only again, we're focused on hens for this project. We do band males if we catch them incidentally, but we're focused on putting transmitters on hens in this case to focus on that reproductive side. So it's a little bit different depending on what end of the state. We have students obviously working on both the eastern side and the Rio side, and basically the methods are the same. The difference is how we trap them. And so on the eastern side of the project, we use rocket netting, which is very standard trapping procedure used across North America, but in particular for easterns. And so they tend to be pretty finicky and not as willing to walk into a trap or walk under a net. And so in this way, you kind of hide the net. In our case, we shoot out of a box. So it's a small box that's kind of hidden on the landscape or nestled into the vegetation, and they get used to feeding in front of it, and then we can set off the explosives and launch the net out of the box to catch the hens. On the Rio side of the project, we instead use walk-in traps. And so again, there's a baiting component there where they have to get used to come into the bait. Usually it's pretty close to a roost site, a winter roost site. So they fly down, they stretch, they do their morning stuff, they go over to get a bite to eat, but over time they've gotten used to these little traps being there, and they walk in and essentially trap themselves. And so in that case, it's a bit more of a passive approach. But at the end of the day, it results in our hands on birds so that we can strap those GPS transmitters to the hens, and then everything after that is similar on both ends of the state, where the students and their technicians are following up on survival, obviously making sure the bird's alive. If it is dead, can we figure out what killed it? And then obviously if the hen makes it into nesting, well, then that starts the whole nesting protocol, where we're obviously trying not to disturb that hen, but identify that nest site location, track her progress, hopefully to a successful hatch. And then if successful, we then go in on that hen early in the morning in the first 2 to 3 days after she's hatched the brood. And that's where we would actually push her off the brood right after daylight. So she's brooding them under her on the ground. We approach, she spooks away. We catch as many of the poults as we can. We do our quick, poult processing, which involves a little suture style. It's a tiny, tiny little, the transmitter would fall through that hole. It's not very big. But we actually suture it to their back, and then keep the brood together, get out of there. Mom comes back, recovers the brood, they go about their day. But now we not only have mom marked, we actually have the poults marked, and hopefully better able to get at poult survival and causes of mortality that way. Well, the hen transmitters are GPS capable, so we're getting really, pretty fine scale movement data on where she selects to spend her time. So there's innumerable questions, many of which have been asked before, and I think the technology is just allowing us to ask better and better questions about where those hens are spending time. So we know the underlying landscape, we know where anthropogenic features are, we know where roads are, we know where she ended up putting her nest. Well, now we know at least to the hour, and in some cases even finer scale than that, everywhere she went. The poult transmitters, in order to be tiny and small and lightweight, and therefore not dangerous to the poult, they're not capable of giving GPS data. We know where they are based on mom's movements, but we also don't know when they disappear. Except in years past, research past, you just have to go and flush the brood periodically. And then there's concerns about whether or not the count is correct. And so there's some bias associated with that. Well, this idea of marking the poults is designed to kind of fill that hole, because what could happen over time is you could take a brood of, say, 10, and if they all have transmitters on them, as you slowly lose those transmitters, those individuals are lost to usually predation, but potentially even just exposure to the weather. Maybe they were just weak and destined to fail from birth. But That's not GPS technology at that point. It's radio signal technology that allows us to at least identify when those poults go missing. Even as mom and the other survivors move on, we're hoping you hope to be able to find that transmitter and go, okay, yeah, this one did die. And that's not always perfect. Sometimes you just find the little poult in a cottonmouth. But in that case, we had a technician track to a snake and find a bulge in the snake. It turned out the snake was actually dead. And so they were able to open it up and confirm indeed that the snake had consumed the poult with the transmitter still attached. Well, in our case, a lot of the stuff that I've been describing to you would relate back to that term I mentioned before, the vital rates, right? So without being super technical and boring people, a lot of this information gets turned into data types that can be used in population modeling. So if we wanted to know the relative effect that these different life stages had on population growth or population decline, we can do that. And so in that way, knowing when things are alive and dead, you can almost treat that as a 0 and a 1. I mean, like I said, it becomes a data type that doesn't necessarily make sense. We talk about them being alive and dead and what killed them, but going into a model, we break that down and it becomes more of a math problem. And so that's our main focus with the survival information. Now the GPS data on the hen, that's also providing spatial information. So we have questions about how they use landscapes. Do those underlying landscapes affect their nest success? How is that underlying landscape related to things like predator density? So another piece of the project I didn't mention that doesn't involve GPS units is using camera trapping, like trail cameras, to assess predator densities and predator activity. Well, now we have GPS information of hens, that those hens are interacting with vegetation on the landscape, but those vegetation types on the landscape are potentially interacting differently with the predator species that may be trying to kill a hen or eat a nest. So in that case, the GPS data becomes more of a spatial question, right? Dots on a map, so we can see how that may lead to better nest success or worse nest success, or better survival or worse survival.